Hi, and welcome to the Uplift with Dabney Brice, the podcast where we'll elevate global stories by shining a spotlight on underrepresented narratives, educating ourselves about current and historical events and diverse cultures and communities. Let's journey together to step outside our comfort zones, uplift each other, and make the world a little bit better along the way. Welcome, my uplifters. It's your girl, Dabney Brice. I'm so excited because today we have my friend, Michael Taylor, who is currently a 3L law student at Howard University. And he's also the host of The Political Mic, where he brings a diverse panel of guests to discuss current events in the world of politics through multiple perspectives. In this episode, we talk about his entry into politics, where the idea of his show came from, and why he believes everyone should pay attention to politics. Michael Taylor, I'm telling y'all, is definitely one to watch in the political world, and I'm so excited that we get to tell his story. And no matter where you are on the political spectrum, this is definitely an informative conversation, and I highly encourage that you stick around to the end. So let's dive in and let's get started. All right. Thank you so much, Mike, for being on the podcast. How are you? How's your day been? How's your week been?
It's been, first of all, thank you for having me, Dabney. It's amazing, incredible opportunity to be here. Love the work you're doing with the Uplift podcast. My week has been, this is actually my week back from spring break. So I'm in my last stretch in law school. So I'm exhausted. I'm anxious at the same time to be over with it. But, right now, I'm just grateful to be midway through the week. Thankful to be this closer to, this milestone.
Mhm.
So, my week's been pretty all right.
That's good to hear, especially I'm sure we'll get into it too about your law school and how your experience has been, but I can't imagine how it is to do law school during a pandemic, because law school is already hard enough in person. So kudos to you. Hopefully you had a relaxing enough break. I know spring breaks are never really breaks when you're a student, but hopefully it was relaxing enough. But speaking of, law school, tell the audience a little bit about you, what you do, and yeah, just maybe a little fun fact about yourself.
Okay, well, I am Michael Taylor. My name, yeah, I'm in my third year in Howard University School of Law. I always had a passion for politics and history,
Hmm.
going back to when I was probably, I would say, in the third or fourth grade.
Wow.
Probably before that. I remember I used to try to memorize as much facts as possible. Still do. And I memorized during that time period every presidential term in order.
Hmm.
So I had I had a teacher who had, for some reason we were going over the presidents for history, and
Hmm.
she switched around Grover Cleveland and Benjamin Harrison. Grover Cleveland, of course, served as the 22nd and 24th president. And so when I brought that to her attention, she said no, and she was going back and forth with me, and she, tried to let me know, look, I'm the teacher in the situation, and you're wrong. And then she came back the next day and she had researched it, and she saw that Grover Cleveland served as the 22nd president before Benjamin Harrison, and then Grover Cleveland came afterwards again. And she apologized and let everyone in the class. So that was kind of like the origin story of me really going into, um, you know, or deciding that politics was the path I wanted to go into. And so when I got to high school, I kind of just made up in my mind, because law seems to be the traditional way to get to that avenue, I'm going to become a lawyer.
Mm.
So it was kind of a narrow view of how to get to the ultimate goal of being a public servant. But as I matured, so did my idea of what it was that I was going to do with this law degree.
Hmm.
So it no longer became an ends to justify the means, but I started to think, maybe my talents are best put to use in the legal field. I'm not really that into, blood and the human body, so I wouldn't make a. So I felt like, the memorization of facts, my ability to have memorize facts and have a photogenic memory, and all these things would be best put to use um, by memorizing case law and using the law the best way I can as a vehicle to achieve civil rights, social
Mm,
justice, equity for folks. And I applied to a school that has a huge reputation to of producing civil rights giants like Thurgood Marshall, Charles Hamilton Houston, Polly Murray. The school that served as a repository for debate and informative thought when it came down to decisions like the Brown versus Board of Education case,
mhm.
equity in the classroom, and so I got accepted, of course. But before I got accepted to
Also, this is Howard University.
Howard University in
Yeah.
Washington, D.C. School of Law. But before I had that opportunity, I was kind of in a position where after I graduated from undergrad, I graduated from Oakwood University, an HBCU in Huntsville, Alabama, May of 2017. And a lot was going on. I was really reevaluating whether or not I wanted to go into public service. Trump had just been elected, and it just seemed like the world was upside down. You
Mhm.
know, what what made sense no longer made sense. And I remember sitting down with my advisor, and I'm a senior, mind you, and I said, I don't even know if I want to go ahead with this degree. He said, we definitely need you. I said, do you think that I should really reevaluate, because I don't know if this is now the new normal for politics.
Mhm.
If facts no longer matter as they once did. If it's a matter of getting personal with your opponent. Mudslinging is now not just something that's tolerated, but is expected of you. Um,
Mhm.
is this really something I want to put myself in? And do I have what it takes to pursue this career if that's what it means? Um, and I was thinking maybe I don't have what it takes, and the professor said, "Heck no! You definitely need to be in the arena." Um,
Mm.
Now more than ever, this should serve as encouragement for you um, to be someone that can change the tide or change the culture of what it means to be someone who serves on the Hill. And I took the I was studying for the LSAT, and I didn't have the money to purchase one of those expensive courses, and so I made
Yeah.
a schedule. I made up my own schedule, and I hit the library every day faithfully. And I, just crunching that time. And during that time period, I started to pick up or look at the application for the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation.
Mm.
And then I told myself, well, no, I might not get in. I got to focus on the LSAT. Let me put a pause on that. And so I did. So I picked it up in around October. I think the application opened. And I told myself that I wasn't going to get in. And then come around the like 5 minutes to the deadline, I decide to go ahead and go forward with this thing. And I'm in the laundromat, and there are kids peeking over at my computer to see if I have games. So this is the setting that I'm in when I submit my application for the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, and I got accepted. And they positioned me in the Senate Health Committee, Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions,
Mhm.
specifically the Education Office, under the leadership of Ranking Member Patty Murray, the Senator of Washington State. And that's where I met you, Dabney. And
Yeah. Yeah, just like for our audience to know, Michael and I know each other. So
oh yeah,
he's not just
history.
yeah, exactly. He's not just like he's not a stranger. Um for those that don't know, I technically graduated from Lehigh University a semester early and because I could and
Mhm.
also to save money because college is expensive. And I decided what would have been my senior spring in 2018. I applied for the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. I don't really remember how like I found out.
Yeah.
I feel like either someone sent it to me or I was looking for internships because I was like, what do I do between then and grad school in fall of 2018? Um, and I found this, I applied, I got in, and that's where I met Michael. The Congressional Black Caucus Foundation is sort of like the nonprofit mouthpiece to the Congressional Black Caucus on Capitol Hill. And they have different internships and fellowships for Black students, Black people interested in going into the field of public service. And so when you get in, you are given a placement either, at least for when we were there, you're either in an office of directly in the office of a senator or representative, or you're on a committee. Um, and like they placed you, it didn't really matter like where you leaned, if you leaned more left or right or moderate, like you kind of were, a lot of times you were placed wherever state you came from, or you were placed on, they really did consider your interest areas, but as much as each office, like whatever their availability was, is where you kind of were placed. And so
Right.
I was in Senator Chuck Schumer's office, who is now the majority leader of the Senate, which was great for me. I'm from New York, so like it made sense why I was there. And Michael was on the HELP committee, which is on the Senate side, the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, which is kind of a mouthful. So that's why we call it the HELP Committee. Um, and so that's how we met. And we've sort of been like following each other ever since, keeping
Oh, yeah.
track of what the other person is doing.
And the
And
first memory I have to squeeze this in here.
yeah, go for it.
Use when we were I think we were going from statutory or where the Senate train stops.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's like around Statutory Hall.
Mm-hmm.
I was seeing you. I think you came down the stairs and you were telling me that you had just uh, gave a tour to Senator Chuck Schumer's grandkids, and you didn't know that you were going to give a tour to his grandkids until they actually showed up. You were
Mm-hmm.
just told that you're giving a tour. I thought that was so so cool.
So
Now,
I was told to prepare. Ooh, excuse me. I was told to prepare to give a tour to important people, but I wasn't told like who until really like the day of. And it was me along with another Schumer intern. And like I remember we like the week of, we're like, we don't know. So we like went to a couple times to the Capitol and like practiced our route, where we would take them, the history. Like I'm telling you, by the end of our internship, I knew the Capitol like the back of my hand. Like I knew the history. Like I didn't need a script anymore. I was like, y'all should hire me as a tour guide because I'm great at this. It was really fun. But yeah, I eventually got to tour. It was actually his nephew and his kids. Um, and I got to I got to actually like, I had been to his Senate office, but I hadn't seen like his room in the office. So I got to see his office. And then usually people aren't allowed on the Senate or House floors unless you are either a representative or one of their staff member. And even then, like they can only have like one or two staff members at a time. So we got to be on the Senate floor when they weren't in session, which is a really big deal if you know anything about politics. So I wasn't allowed to take any pictures, so I don't have any proof that I was there, but I was there, I promise.
I can attest. But it was interesting because even before I get into what the experience was like,
Mm-hmm.
I knew that I had friends went to high school with me, went to college, and now all of a sudden they're getting accepted to medical school. They're accepted to all these different programs, physical therapy school, dental. And so I was thinking, I'm a little behind. But now, mind you, I graduated from high school at age 16, and I graduated.
Wait, you graduate at 16?
I did. I graduated at 16, and by the time I'm graduating from college, I'm 20.
Wait,
So,
how old are you now?
well, I just turned 24 a few months ago. So,
Wow.
but
Impressive.
but at the same time, I'm thinking I'm behind, because I'm not where my colleagues are. I'm not getting accepted to a program. I'm not going on it, and I didn't really have a roadmap as to or a concrete plan as to what was next, and that was really
Mm,
scary, And so when I got accepted to this amazing opportunity, I was thinking, this is obviously divine intervention. This is like the transition period where I'll get to discover whether this is actually something I want to do.
mm-hmm,
And this was really just an uplifting time for me because I went from a really low feeling place to all of a sudden I'm feeling I'm on top of the world. I'm on Capitol Hill, and when I got there, I started to experience a little of imposter syndrome. I'm
mm,
go through the Russell building, the Dirksen, I'm in the Hart building. That's where the office was.
Yeah, we were in the same building.
And we're coming, toe to toe with, folks who are Jesus staff, folks who we only see on MSNBC or CNN. And we're literally in the elevator with them all of a sudden. We see senators left and right, and to come from, I was living in a town with less than 6,000 people, country town. All we had was a Walmart and a few fast food restaurants. And all of a sudden now I'm in the political capital of the world. It's like, man, how did this happen? And so,
Mm,
despite the fact that, this is something I wanted to do in my life, or, I have a really detailed knowledge of, history and facts and who was elected when and from what state and, what positions they take on public policy and everything like that. I'm starting to doubt whether or not I deserve to be here. And I remember in particular when I got there, the big thing was the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act. That was what the
mm,
Health Committee's focus was, because we really thought that the chairman of this committee, uh, Senator Lamar Alexander, and ranking member Patty Murray had such a great working relationship, which made the committee one of the most bipartisan and productive committees in the Senate during that time. We really thought we were going to get to a place where they can actually come to a solid agreement on the provisions on the next reauthorization of the bill.
mhm,
And this bill, I think the last time it was reauthorized was 10 years prior, which would have been 2008. So this bill is really consequential. You're talking about student loan debt. You're talking about GI bills. You're talking about, secondary education as it pertains to, going into a trade school, the military, whatever the case may be. So this is a huge bill, and it means so much for a lot of people, us included. And so I was tasked with coming up with binders for each of the experts they were going to bring from academia, presidents of universities, people who study, the effects of education on, folks of, who are college age and everything. People who are leading experts in their fields, all in the field of education. And so I was coming with a binder of their bios, notes, everything that each of the panelists would need. And all of a sudden, the supervisor I had, intern coordinator, he said, "This is awesome. This is great work." And literally, as the words were still on his lips, I had accidentally turned, and he had a canteen of water, and I accidentally pressed the water, and it spilled all over the work. I had this.
no.
I'm telling you the truth, and he was so upset, and all of that was because of my anxiety, and
Mm,
whether or not I'm doing the right thing and everything. Now, that's just an example of how what's in your mind can actually manifest into actual physical things. And so I learned from that. I learned
mm,
from the experience, and I said, I need to really calm down and actually understand that this was not an accident.
mhm.
I do deserve to be here. And for instance, when they had and you probably remember from your office, like a thick ream of cards of each of the senators' names.
Yes. Like flashcards with their faces too.
Right. And he was saying, one of the things we had to do was go over it and make sure that we know each, but I had already knew each senator's name, even the less high profile ones, like, you know, Daines of Montana or Steve Daines, or, folks that really you don't see much of on, the airwaves. And so, that just gave me validation to know, look, as much as anyone else, whose office is where, and, what their role is in the Senate and the positions they've had, and, the voting records they've had. So if you don't deserve to be here, you know, what's that saying about all the other folks who, may not have as much information about history or as deep of a passion for it as you.
Mm.
Um, I remember I think it was like around this time during that period 3 years ago, I had the opportunity to work with the CBCF in their headquarters, which was next to the Trinidadian embassy, which was cool because my mom's from Trinidad.
Oh, wow.
The person there had requested for me to look at the minutes. There were, the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation members like Sheila Jackson Lee, and then also business leaders from the Anheuser-Busch Corporation and everything were having a meeting. And my job was to just crunch in the time in which each of the members spoke and everything like that to make it more organized for whoever it is had to review the document. And the woman, when I was done, she said, "What was your name again?" And I could go over my name, and she said, "You were one of the top applicants for this cohort." And if she didn't say that, I'll constantly be in a state of, was it a fluke? Was it really? And, I
Mhm.
think it's a lesson for anyone who's experiencing, um, you know, imposter syndrome, whether it is, whether they've been accepted to a great program, whether they got a great internship opportunity. There's always that temptation to feel as if maybe this was an accident, but it wasn't, you know, because
Yeah.
when you the amount of people that could have had your position, you know, the odds were that you wouldn't get the position. This is an excellent opportunity, and you want to make the most of it, and you don't
Mhm.
want to let your mind play tricks on you, um, because it will.
Preach.
You let it.
Preach.
Yeah, but that was just really cool experience. It was a really awesome experience, unforgettable.
I think you hit the nail on the head essentially because I felt the same way. Like whether or not like it was noticeable because I wouldn't have noticed that with you. In fact, when like during our time there, all I could think was, wow, this kid is really passionate about politics. He really wants to be of service to others, and you are so smart, and like you have such a
Thank you.
breadth and a wealth of knowledge about a lot of different policy areas and other things outside of just politics, um but I felt the same way too, and like I feel like that's so common, especially with Black and brown students,
Mhm.
um and especially in a field, in an arena that is still white
Yeah,
and male dominated, and especially on the Senate side,
yeah,
like the House is more diverse. In fact, like at the time, it was the most diverse. I think
yeah.
it's more diverse pretty much since like every election, it's become more and more diverse. But at the time that we were there in 2018, it was the most diverse it had ever been in terms of like also representation with gender.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a
but the
different universe.
it's a
Different. Yeah.
the House and the Senate are two completely different worlds, it feels like. And the Senate is still very white. I mean, at the time, there was only 3 Black senators, and now there's only 2 because Kamala Harris is now the vice president.
Right.
And so you go to this arena, you're walking around these halls, and there's very few people that look like you. Very few people that come from your background and understand your struggles and the things that you are fighting for and why you're fighting for it. I was lucky enough to be in an office like Schumer's because he, as the Senate minority at the time, he was also in charge of the Senate diversity um, initiative, and so his office had more people that looked like me, Black and brown people of color in general. But like as soon as I left his office, it didn't look like that. It was another world. And so I would love to hear more about how it was for you
Mhm.
being a Black man in this space.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a great question, and I do wanna mention the fact that I was the only Black intern or Black person, period, in the office, that
Mm,
I was the only straight male also in the office, so there was a lot of, "You're the only this, you're the only that," but rather than and I guess that did play a role, because you don't you hear, pressures from home, and you hear it all the time, you have to be twice as better, you have to prove that you belong at the seat of the table, and so that constant notion that, look, I can't mess up, because if I do, that's a reflection on a whole bunch of folks that look like me.
yeah, which is an unfortunate burden.
Right, right, right. And that added pressure, a lot of it is self-imposed,
Mm,
uh, because when it really boils down to is whether or not you could do the work, whether or not you're showing seriousness, whether or not you're showing that you are sincere in your work ethic, you're consistent, you're diligent, you're someone that the staffers can depend on. That's really what impresses folks. And so when I started to make it less about me and more about what can I do to bring something to the art, to what can I do to alleviate some of the burden, the stress for the staffers in the office, it really started to just be like a burden lifted off my back, and I started to enjoy it more. How can I make the most of this experience? Um, and I started to act as if every day was going to be my last day there.
mm,
Um, you know, how can I make the most of this experience? I started to make friends with the folks in the personal office. I think I was the one of the few only members of the ARC 2018 spring cohort that was in a public policy office. And so I started to envy a little bit you guys who were in the personal office, to interact with constituents directly, deal more on the politics side. But I started to learn a lot about public policy, particularly in the education field. They had me go to different briefings. I remember Senator Todd Young and Marco Rubio had a briefing, veterans and how to make it more accessible, make post-secondary education more accessible for veterans returning, wanting to, get a higher education to get back into the workforce. I went to K Street. We went to the Gallup poll building, where Congressman Will Hurd, who's a Republican, and Congressman Joaquin Castro, the twin brother of Julian
Mhm.
Castro, for president. They were also guest speakers, along with Senator Michael Bennett, on how to improve the education gap in the Latino community, which was interesting because based on my experience, I've only attended programs like that that were aimed at improving inequalities and discrepancies within the African American community. But that was a wonderful opportunity to network, and as I started to make it less about me, I started to really enjoy the moment, being in the moment, and make connections, some of which last me till this day. And so I've kept into contact with these folks through email, sent them articles whenever I saw something interesting coming. The
Mhm.
it, you know it really became a more enjoyable experience once I started to focus less on um, the fact that I was one of the few Black individuals walking the halls in the Senate, and more about, look, I'm just a small cog in this huge clock. How can I be the most effective in what I'm doing?
Mhm.
And how can I enjoy it more? How can I
Yeah.
really make memories that I'll remember 10, 20, 30 years from now? And that's really when it became a better experience for me.
I think that's such good advice for anyone that's listening. That honestly, it doesn't matter what industry, but if you're specifically Black, Indigenous, person of color in public service, and you're in a space where you're going to be like, until there we do better in terms of diversity, inclusion, and justice for these groups of people, it's going to be mainly white spaces. To think at first, it's culture shock to just
Yeah.
sort of like look around. I can imagine like coming from an HBCU and then having to go straight into Capitol Hill. Um, but like to think after you get over that shock, that initial of like, okay, I'm the only person of color, I'm the only person that looks like me right now. And think about, okay, why am I here? Why did I want to do this? What do I, at the end of the day, this is my experience
Mhm.
and I'm here to help.
Right.
So what can I do to achieve that? And like you said, act like it's your last day every day so that you can think about how am I going to make the most impact at this moment.
But I have to confess, I never really got over that starstruck. Uh,
No, you don't. You never do, because it's still like it's the closest to celebrity
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
that we've gotten so far, even though they're not celebrities, but like
And I remember when Senator Booker passed by the office, and because the glass, the door is like glass, so you can see right.
mhm.
And so I would sit at the receptionist desk a lot, greeting folks who were coming in. And so I saw him, and I was like, "Was that Senator Booker?" And I walked out and I saw the back of him walking with, he had staffers flanked on his left and right. And I came back in and I told my supervisor, "That was Senator Booker." And he was like, "Yeah, it was." Like, what do you want? Like, I was just like, how are you not, how is this not exciting? And so that was just an example. Like, you see people all the time, and for me, it never got old.
Mm-mm.
It was always like exhilarating. But at the same time, this opportunity really placed us up in the forefront of history, because
Mm.
when Mark Zuckerberg came to testify,
That was wild.
and it was so incredible the way that it happened, because it was a really lax day at the office. I think it was one of the staffers' birthday. Actually, it was the supervisor's birthday, and so it was a really lax day. It felt like a Friday,
Mhm.
but when it was, they ended early and everything too. Even though I think it was like a Wednesday or something, but it was in the middle of the week, and they said, you can go back home early, And so I said, well, being that this hearing is still going on, I don't want to lose out on an opportunity to be a witness to history. So I went in. There was no line because it was towards the end of the day. And this is the Judiciary Committee. So this was like there was always a big profile hearing in the Judiciary Committee. So I went down on the second floor, um, and I was able to go right in. And next, I'm seeing the press pool. They're sitting to my left, and I saw someone had left their seat, and there's a sign on the seat that says "Press Only." And so I
Mhm.
kind of take and I kind of move it real quick discreetly so no one can see it. And I take the seat. No one says anything. I don't say anything. And I was like literally just feet away from the hearing that was going on. I'm taking I was taking a few photos just for proof that I was there. And I was just thinking, this is such an amazing experience. Like nobody can, like who else could, and Dabney working with Minority Leader at the time, Chuck Schumer, like who else would have the opportunities that you or I had to witness history firsthand in person.
Mhm.
Um, and there's a lot of other historic moments that happened outside of Capitol Hill. For instance, the March for Our Lives rally.
Mhm.
That was a huge day, and I think the TV news coverage really didn't do it justice. Like to be there was a totally different experience.
Yeah.
And so when I'm now off the Hill and I'm able to look at a lot of these stories making the headlines now, it has a huge different meaning.
Mm.
These senators being stopped, in Dirksen building or Russell. I'm like, I was literally just there. I'm looking at the background and everything. And so it's an amazing experience. And the reverence and the awe that you have for the Capitol made the events of January 6th even more horrifying.
Mhm.
Because you and I know, we had to go through so much security just to get in, and we, had IDs.
Yeah, I literally, when I tell people that day and talking to friends who don't know that much about Capitol Hill, I would say, like, y'all, like, you have no idea. It is not easy to get into these buildings.
Exactly. It's like the airport.
It is like the airport. Like, and so it baffled me that that even happened and that, like, it still feels like a weird nightmare. Like, and like knowing that we knew people inside those buildings and like
Yeah.
we were those people inside those buildings at some point. Like, yeah, you have a different like experience to seeing things like that when you've worked
And
inside the
some of
Capitol.
our friends, from that program were able to land jobs and careers on the Hill that they're still on now. This was just now, 3 short years ago.
Hmm.
When I saw footage of staffers looking like they're trying to desperately find a place to hide, in the nick of time before this mob comes, I'm just putting myself, like you said, in their shoes. What would we have done in that position? Knowing that these people didn't just stay on one floor or anything like that. These people were making. I saw them on the Senate train, and you and I know that's one of the most restricted areas.
Hmm.
I had an ID to show, and sometimes I was still turned down because that's a area where you're always going to see a senator riding the train from the
Hmm.
transfers you from the Senate to the House side or the Senate to the Capitol dome. You're always going to see someone there. So for me to see them have easy access to these to
And
these
on this,
areas,
like the Senate floor, where, like I mentioned earlier, no one, unless you are a senator or one of their staff person, like
definitely,
their staffers, no one is on the floor.
definitely, and just it really brought to light, you know, the fact that what we were hearing was just a matter of economic concern in terms of what was fueling all of this animosity towards what folks would call the establishment or people who were cemented figures in government or the Democratic Party or it goes to show you that this was much deeper than that. This was an identity crisis, I think, that was unfolding because you had a group of people who were in the face of their own party members. This they were a threat to people in the Republican Party.
Hmm.
They were chanting "Hang Mike Pence." They were, and there were some people they knew, like Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, that were sympathizers with their cause. So they were not after them. So that shows me that this was not just a crazy, revved up mob that had no.
No,
They were tactical.
it was
Uh,
premeditated.
Exactly. They had a plan. They knew what they were doing. They knew where they were going. And what's amazing is that these people found themselves in offices that were not designated. that were still high profile offices. So the events of that day really brought to light. I had people reach out to me that day, and they thought I was still on the Hill, and they were
Mhm.
asking how I'm doing and everything. And I had to let them know, I'm not there, but I hope you're doing okay. To let me know, how everything's going. And remember, this took place, I think, over a period of 4 to 5 hours. So you have a long time for some kind of intervention, and it was amazing to me how it took that long. But in all, the experience in the Hill, I think the first day for me was the shutdown, January 23rd of 2018. And
Mhm.
ironically, the big debate, like it is today, is immigration
Mhm.
on what should be done with the southern border. And I ended off in May. So much happened in between: the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas massacre that took place in February. Um, the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act. Trump was gearing up for the midterm elections that were going to happen later that fall, where we saw Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the squad, and other like-minded congressmen and women take over. So it was a very historic time and pivotal moment that we found ourselves on the Hill, and it's something I'll never forget. I'll always cherish that memory.
I wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk about, like you mentioned, like you're not on the Hill anymore. You're currently a law student at Howard University in your last year, last semester, about to prepare to take the bar later this year, or later this year.
Yeah,
When
this
are you
summer.
taking this summer? Yes, this summer. So, but while you are a law student, you have this amazing show, this amazing podcast called The Political Mic, which is a little play on words to your name.
Oh yeah,
Smart choice. Where you essentially bring a panel of guests um, each week to talk about current events happening in our country. And I had the opportunity to be on your show during the holidays this past year. And I just love your show in general because it's so insightful, it's intellectual. And I feel like since like this past year, your show is so important, more important than ever before because of the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter protests, the 2020 elections, now currently with the rise in hate crimes towards the Asian and Pacific Islander community, Asian American and Pacific Islander community. So I feel like people, because of all that, people are now paying attention more to politics and trying to hold their politicians accountable. So I would love to know, when did you start this and why did you want to start the political mic? Especially like law school is no joke.
yeah.
So I've always been amazed about how you've been able to juggle law school and your show.
Well, let me start by saying it actually started in a very comical way. I started it in the summer in July. And I was at the time, before July, I was taking a course, a 4 credit course in law school. And I knew that, once this is done, I'll have time for myself a little bit before I start back in the fall. And during that time, I saw a lot of my friends and colleagues posting or resharing a lot of misinformation online. About, because there's a lot of disappointment and animosity towards the Biden campaign because Bernie Sanders had dropped out, and there's a lot of people who actually thought Bernie Sanders was going to be the nominee, and they thought he was the candidate to go forward and like be like a huge dent in the wall to change a lot of these structural policies that have you know so many long lasting consequences and effects. And I personally was supporting the Biden campaign from the beginning, since before he jumped in April 25th of 2019. But I started this podcast because I saw a lot of people sharing things that were not just false, but also damaging. Damaging not just for one party or the other, but damaging for democracy, because you had people sharing information that would encourage people not to participate and not to vote. And I thought that, I had to do something, even if it was going to be a small, dent in the amount of animosity or, apathetic attitudes towards the political process. I thought, well, I have to do something. Someone who has, like I mentioned earlier, all my life I've basically been very much in love with the democratic system. And so I remember during the summer, I was actually in the transition. I was moving from North Carolina to Georgia, and my little brother at the time, I think Trump and Biden were polling neck and neck, and I think at the time Biden was up by 1 or 2 points. It was really close. Like it was a very close neck and neck matchup. And I was thinking, how is it that in the heels of the George Floyd incident, and remember what happened with the photo op in in DC, where tear gas was used to move the protesters out of the way so Trump can have his time with the Bible and the church.
Mhm.
And I was like, how after all of that, right? And the mess that we're in with the virus and the mishandling of the pandemic, why is it that it's so close? And that's discounting all of what happened since he took office in the first term. eh, I was like, how is it this close? And so my brother, who's 6 years younger than me, asked me, if you can go in the future a few months from now and see that Trump won re-election, and then you can go back to right now, what would you do? I said, well, I'll start a show. I'll start something where I have some kind of, I facilitate some kind of conversation to force people to think about what they're doing, or why they're not voting, or why they need to be more engaged. And so he said, so you know what you're doing and you're not doing it.
Mm. You got a good brother there.
That's how it started. And so I said, well, I need to do something now. It's on my conscience. So I started this program. I didn't know what I was going to call it. At first, I was thinking of a name, and I thought outside the Beltway. That was the first name I thought of. And that sounded too political. It sounded like a really wonky name for folks who are only political heads to really appreciate.
Mhm.
So I tried to, like you did, to have that play on the name, and I said, well, the political mic. It seems, because I wanted to have a repository for conversation, not just for people who are experts or proficient in the world of politics, but anybody who has an opinion can come on and share their views and why they have those views. And then, not to try to force anyone to change their views, but to just bring people together to have a civil dialogue. And then both sides will be forced to wonder or think about the drawbacks of each of their positions, and really seriously take a second look as to what it is that they support and why they support it.
Mm.
And so I really didn't anticipate it to last that long, but especially like you mentioned, because I knew that the fall semester was about to start. But it kind of worked out where Thursdays were kind of still my best days to have this thing. And so Thursday nights have been, the time in which this program takes place. I've had law students, I've had folks I met like you on the Hill. I
Mhm.
think I had you on Christmas Eve. And we really have I think a really great productive dialogue. I've had Republicans on, I've had Democrats on, I've had people who don't affiliate with either party on the program. And I think what really makes it a great program is that we can each respect the positions that we take. We're not trying to out talk the other one. We're not trying to persuade or out debate the other. We're really just trying to get to know each other in terms of what we believe at the core. And it's been a great experience. I've learned a lot from others who have been on the program. I've had professors in academia. I've had law students. I've had interns on the Hill. I've had local municipal leaders,
Mhm.
state leaders, and I've also had some really good, high-profile guests like Chris Matthews, Beto O'Rourke, Professor Alan Lichtman, who's predicted every election accurately going back to 1984.
Wow.
Jeff Greenfield, who was a correspondent on ABC, CNN. He's now a regular on the PBS NewsHour. And was it Richard Haas, the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, also a regular on the MSNBC's Morning Joe.
Mhm.
And most recently, I think 2 weeks ago, House Majority Whip Jim Clyburn. Each of these men brought so much to the table in terms of their perspectives on the world and in public policy. And each of them you see that each of them have a solid understanding of not just history, but how history intersects with their role in this democracy.
Mm.
And that's really one of the things I was so happy to bring out onto the program. Um, and it's been an amazing experience. I keep in touch with them through email mostly, and so far, folks, tend to really enjoy it. And I think what's amazing is like people who don't even consider themselves political
Mhm.
also seem to be regular viewers, and that was something I'm really most proud of because I was trying to make, public policy, politics, uh, more interesting for people who would think it's just a source of division, just a wedge issue, something to avoid because we don't want to get, too controversial or anything like that. I say it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be that way.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And just like you mentioned earlier, just there's like a sense of camaraderie, even if people do have different opinions when you're listening. And at the end of the day, we're here to inform and to challenge people to think about different perspectives and to make, after hearing all the different sides and doing their own personal research, to
Mhm.
think for themselves and to make the best decision for themselves and for their communities. And so you mentioned like some of the guests that you've had and like Beto O'Rourke. If you don't know who Beto O'Rourke is, he first ran for senator against Ted Cruz, and then he ran again recently for the uh, presidential campaign on the Democrat side, and again, Majority Whip Jim Clyburn. You had recently, but also, like you said, like the behind the scenes people, like staffers, and that you don't like. You have the politician who's the face,
Right, right,
but
right.
then there's a whole group of people behind them that are doing the research, writing these memos and reports, and helping to keep their politician and their member informed. And then you've had activists, you've had journalists, you've had um, people
Yeah.
who aren't in this field like professionally but have an opinion. So I would love to know, like, what have you learned from and enjoyed the most about these conversations, and also what have you learned about yourself through these conversations?
Well, yeah, yeah. Thank you for that question. I've learned that, despite what you hear in terms of the polling and, we're most America's most divided since the Civil War, Reconstruction. You keep hearing that a lot. And what I've learned is that at the core, people want a government that makes sense. People want to understand why it is that we're in foreign conflicts. They want to understand that. They get frustrated when things get muddled and complicated. People want to know that there's a government that does provide a safety net for emergency situations like a pandemic. And despite what you're seeing on Capitol Hill, you do have 90% of the American people supporting what we just had, the COVID relief package. I think that's evidence of the fact that, we're not as divided as I think members in the media make us out to be.
Mm,
We may disagree on, you know, who is best to lead, and whose vision in terms of the agenda is best to put forward in terms of how to accomplish these goals. But at the core, we agree on the fact that government should play a role in terms of how it responds and how it meets the needs for people who are impoverished, people who are facing, eviction, people who are, having children having to cope with online learning and all of these different things. We do believe that the government should play a role in this. And I think David Brooks, columnist for the New York Times, wrote an op-ed recently and saying, this is kind of like a reverse 1981 scenario where you do have a seasoned politician coming in and challenging the way in which Americans view their government. Reagan, of course, said, government is the problem. But now you have Biden saying, look, government has to be involved. That's how we're going to get out of this rut. And so people are on board, as they were back then in the early 1980s. They're on board in the early 2020s with this vision that the government has to play a role. Otherwise, we're not going to be uh, out of this rut anytime soon.
mhm,
So I think what I learned was that um, once you get people on where they agree, it's so easy to talk about the disagreement in a civil way and not get personal, not get heated or anything like that, because we can always revert back to where we do agree. Uh,
mm,
that's one of the things I was, proud to bring out in the show. I've had, for instance, Republicans from Stanford University, the Stanford University College Republicans came on, uh,
mm,
and we were able to, sit down and we agreed on the fact that there was a mishandling of the pandemic during the Trump administration. We agreed on the fact that even, there was a mishandling with the nursing home situation in New York with Cuomo. We agreed, there were times where we could agree, and then we disagreed on where certain blame was to be placed. But we agreed that, for instance, when the Texas crisis was happening in February, we agreed that that was a responsibility of the government. That was a failure of the government. So I think that this new generation of folks aren't like the generation of the 1960s, 70s. I think we do have this kind of desire to not be involved in constant ongoing war. We have a desire to uh, be respectful for everyone, regardless of their religious background, regardless of their race. We do believe that we should take a stand against hate crimes, like the Asian hate crime
Hmm.
place last week in Atlanta. And so that allows me to understand that things may not be as divisive as it was back in the time of the Reconstruction era. Now, I'm not going to act as if we're unified 100% or anything like that. Of course not.
Mm-mm.
But there are points where we can agree and move forward. You do have a large part of the American people who are saying that something needs to be done with gun control, you know,
Hmm.
for a while. And so there's certain points where we just believe that government should be, curbing some of the epidemics and crises that this country has had to deal with for so long. And what I learned personally about myself is my ability to kind of relate to people that I normally would not have thought myself able to relate to. Uh,
Mm.
I was able to really, kind of, get to know some of these people on a personal level before we went live, and get to know their life story, get to know what it is that really brought them to the world of politics and public policy, why it is that they're doing what they're doing, and kind of see similarities with my own interests and how they intersect with their interests. You
Mm.
know, we both come from different areas. We both have different winding stories as to how we got here. But when we get here, we see I can see similarities in myself with them. So those are some of the things I learned with this project.
So, with all that you said, where do you see the show going and how do you want it to grow, either over the next few years or however long you see fit that the show should go on for?
Well, to be honest with you, if I would be lying if I said I had a long-term goal for the show.
Hmm.
Now, it's kind of like being playing by ear. But so far, I can't take any of the credit. All the glory belongs to God, first of all.
Hmm.
So, what has happened with the high-profile guests and everything is nothing short of divine intervention. There was no plan in terms of how these things went. And what was amazing is that sometimes, well, not even sometimes, all the time, the shows would always, especially with the high-profile names, come at a time when that person is playing a pivotal role in what the national discourse is about. So, for instance, in October, mid-October, there was a lot of chatter as to whether or not Texas can go blue.
Mm.
That's the time Beto O'Rourke was able to come on the program. This past 2 weeks ago, there was a lot of talk about what's in the stimulus package. What's going on? What is the House doing? What kind of provisions are in it? And that's when House Majority Whip is able to talk about what's in that package, and not only in that package, but in the gun reform bill that he's put forward. So it seems to be a timely show in that it's always responsive as to what the national discourse is at a given period of time, and then it provides an outlet for people who feel a little detached or uncertain or not as informed to actually let their opinions be made known, and to actually learn something. So where I see the show going is kind of a continuation. I'm hoping to have more people, more young people engaged. I'm hoping that as the show develops and takes on new form, that it just continues to serve as a repository for young people, not like a mainstream news network, but where people can feel safe to let their opinions be made known, political views, without fear of embarrassment or fear of having to debate or defend what it is that they believe to a point of an argument or anything like that. But similar to a way where people feel safe to go on Instagram to find TikTok videos and just to look at funny clips and different things like that, and catch up on what their friends are doing. I'm hoping that this serves as a platform where people, if they want to know something about what's going on in the world politically, they would come to this podcast and listen to some of their colleagues and what they're saying, and see whether or not they agree with what they're saying. And if they don't agree, maybe they'll see fit to put their voice into the mix as well.
Hmm. Mm, that's amazing. And so I think I just want to say kudos to you for doing this, because I feel like you're also doing it in a way that a lot of times we get lost in, like, even though MSNBC, NBC, CNN, all these channels are like great and how we obtain our news, it's sometimes nice to have a smaller platform, because there isn't the even the politics behind the scenes that sometimes translates on these shows. And like, you're not doing it with the intention of being biased in a certain way. You're literally trying to bring people towards the mic, like you said, the political mic, and share their thoughts. And like you said, if you don't necessarily agree with what that person is saying, you have that opportunity, that space to also come on the mic and share your thoughts as well. Um, and so, given that, so like, while at least most people now understand that paying attention to politics and policy is important, it is easy to be discouraged or deterred by some of the things that are happening. I mean, for example, like right now with the latest like mass shootings, gun control is back on everyone's forefront, and everyone's having this conversation that we've repeatedly have, and it could easily be discouraging to be like, okay, we're obviously not going to get anything
Right.
done because we keep having to have this conversation. So how do you stay hopeful in those difficult moments? And um, what would you say to someone who feels that way about politics? And then this is an added question: do you believe that we'll actually see formative change in this country?
Well, these are awesome questions, and first and foremost, I think there are places to be hopeful. When I looked at the voter turnout this past election, I was hopeful. Over 80 million people voted for Joe Biden, and then of course Trump got the second highest number of votes. But what it shows me is that in order to have a democracy that's running well and is healthy, you have to have voter turnout in high rates. So even though we do see a large amount of states coming up with new voter ID laws and new tactics, for instance, that make handing out water bottles to folks online illegal and different things like that, I do see that there's a desire to participate in the democracy. And remember, this was at a time when people were restricted because of the virus. So you had to really be intentional to
Hmm.
pick the mail-in ballot. You couldn't just, it wasn't just one of those things that you just did just for doing it. You had to do it because in order to send in the request form, you had to wait a period of time, get the ballot back, and then fill it in and then send it again. So it showed me that there were people who were actually wanting to participate, who were engaged, no matter what side you were on, and wanted to make sure that their voice was made in this time in history. It also, I'm also finding, some positive light in the high number of people who support the COVID relief bill, who think that government should intervene on their behalf, and the amount of people who support common sense gun reform, who want background checks, who are tired of constantly hearing about people, innocent people, average everyday people like themselves, who were living their lives with not the slightest thought of being a victim to gun violence, all of a sudden being gunned down. Um, it gives me hope that there are people out there who want to see something done about it, who are not complicit or just apathetic and just decide, well, this is just how it's going to be. Um, and I get encouragement from folks in our generation
Hmm.
who look at things as they are, like Robert Kennedy said, and ask why not. Why does it have to be this way? Why do we have to be saddled with so much student loan debt?
Mm.
Why do we have to have a dysfunctional immigration system that treats people inhumanely? Why do we constantly have to, be dealing with mass shootings and police brutality, and all of these different things? Why can't we, defend the environment, ensure that minority communities are not strategically placed in places next to landfills that
Hmm.
all these carbon emissions and pathogens that cause asthma and other diseases. we're in a generation that constantly tries to push the envelope in terms of what's possible. And we're not just rolling over and saying, well, this is just the way it is. That gives me encouragement. We do have senators that serve as roadblocks, like Pat Toomey and Joe Manchin, in terms of gun reform. But you have people, advocates, people who are, pastors, people who are community leaders who are saying, we need change now, because the 21st century cannot look like the 20th century. We need to have, reforms, serious reforms, and we need to expect more from government. I think that's what gives me hope. In terms of, I can't remember your next question. I'm sorry.
I was saying, do you believe that we'll actually see formative change in this country? I mean, we already have, at least within this year, we have, but moving
And
forward.
yeah, and I think the thing we have to understand is politics. American history in general is like a constant ebb and flow of people who want to expand freedom and people who want to restrict it.
Hmm.
We saw it during the Reconstruction era, like we talked about. During that period of time, there's a record number of African Americans serving in the House of Representatives, being elected to state office. And all of a sudden, you have what the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. You have domestic terrorism. You have, uh, a huge backlash against that, and then that's followed by the Civil Rights era, the 50s and the 60s and 70s. And that's followed by the era of where Nixon comes out and says, let's have let's go return to normalcy. Let's roll back some of these civil rights provisions and laws. Let's have let's roll back on affirmative action. And that was during the 70s and 80s and early 90s. And then you had a period where we're constantly kind of like flipping back and forth more frequently than before. Clinton followed by Bush, W. Bush followed by Obama, followed by Trump. But the consistency is that after every time there's a huge progress made, it's always followed by regression. It's always followed by hostility towards that progress. People who say they want their country back, folks who say they want things as they were before. And so we shouldn't expect anything different going forward.
Mm.
What we should do differently is not get apathetic about it. Instead, we should expect it, and we should be even more determined to make that period of progress even more meaningful.
Mm.
Affordable Care Act, for instance, wasn't perfect. Obama himself said it many times. But then you have a huge movement to try to repeal and replace it with nothing, you know. And then we have now a period where Biden is saying, "Look, we're going to use this opportunity that we have with this pandemic to restore some of the provisions in the ACA, to bring more people into the fold of being insured." And so I think that transformative change will take place, but it'll take place not as fast as people want it. It'll take place in a period of increments. And we have to be patient and we have to be consistent if we want that transformative change to happen.
Mm. So important. Consistency, patience, and don't be apathetic. Because at the end of the day, this affects our everyday lives.
Definitely.
And I think I want to add to your point that like a lot of times we focus on the national level, but a lot of change can happen on the state and local level as well. You just have to do your research and find the ways in which you can be involved in those levels. Because sometimes you won't see things happen. Like, for example, gun laws. You may not see things happen on the national level yet, but you can be involved in like asking your state senators and your state representatives and to have more like background checks and just better gun laws that protects all of us. Like for example, like New York, we rarely have. I don't really remember time hearing about mass shootings in New York State, and it's because a lot is our gun laws. It's really difficult to carry some of these militarized weapons. So things, and that's all due to activists and representatives and people fighting to like, and also through their vote on who they were voting for to represent them to create this change. And so to all the listeners, like I know it can be very discouraging. I know I have moments like we all do where you're just like, oh, again, or just like in general, you're just like, what's next? But It's not new. Unfortunately, it's not new. So now that we know that, let's do our part. Let's do what we can do to eventually create this change that we want to see.
Yeah, and we got to carry this energy in the midterm season. Like
Hmm.
I remember when a lot of people, even in the African American community, were complaining that Obama is not doing enough and not enough is happening on the ground level and everything. And I was like, my response to them was, "Did you vote in the 2014 midterm?" No, I didn't vote. Did you vote in 2010? No, I don't think so. If you don't participate, you can't expect much. Because what you're doing is you're giving the other side the opportunity to make that decision on your behalf,
Hmm.
and too much is at stake to let that happen. And the majority of the change happens on the state and local level.
Hmm.
Once we engage in that, all of a sudden it's like, and I like our system better than the parliamentarian system because with the parliamentarian system, although it's big, it's one huge sweep of parties coming in one after the other. Uh, our system forces our citizens or requires even more our citizens to participate. So we have a direct stake at what's going on, and a tangible stake at what's happening in our country.
Yep. So participate, vote when it's your time to vote, y'all. All right. So that's it for all the serious questions that I got. Now we're getting into the speed round before we close off. And I have 5 questions, 5 or 6 questions for you that I don't want you to think too hard about. Just like whatever comes to mind first. So the first question I got, are you ready first
I'm
of
ready.
all?
I'm ready.
Okay. First question is your favorite guest so far on the podcast?
That's hard. I'm gonna have to say, I think it was Chris Matthews.
Mm, okay.
Yeah, Chris
No,
Matthews.
do you have more to say on that?
Yeah, well, it was hard between him and Beto O'Rourke, and the reason why is because both of them, talked to me before there, and they wanted Chris Matthews. He really wanted to pick my brain, and it was kind of like a freight train the way he was
Mm.
speaking. It's like you either jump on or you miss the train. He's very fast, and so he was asking me at the time, do you think they're gonna, because the joy and what was happening at the post office, that was the big news at the time. Do you think it's going to, cause a lot of people to not vote? And I was like, well, I'm trying to try to formulate my thoughts as I'm talking. And I start to say, I do think, the section 5 of the voting rights act. He's like, no, 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 don't tell me about section 5. I know about section 5. Tell me more. And so he's very fast and stuff like that. So I really enjoyed him picking my brain and trying to get to know me in terms of trying to get to know how I'm going to be when he sits down with me in the podcast.
Interesting. Next question. A politician in general that you admire and respect.
Well, besides President Obama, of course, because of the adversity and animosity that his administration faced and what they were able to get done in spite of that, I do admire. I think, if we're just going to look at public servants on the Hill, I think Jim Clyburn is someone that I admire a lot. He was from a generation, going back to John Lewis and folks who gave up and expected uh, self-sacrifice to be the means through which change could be achieved. He was from a generation that expected, a lot of blowback in terms of the progress that are going to be made. Even though he's elected 91, his record spans from the civil rights era, as an activist and everything like that. So I think he's someone that stands out to me. Of course, Elijah Cummings, of course, as well, but and John Lewis, but who's alive right now, I would say Jim Clyburn is one of the last of the Mohegans in that respect.
Hmm. Um, favorite DC spot.
DC, I really like this is I love the National Mall.
Mm.
I know it sounds corny, but even when I was about 4 years old, my parents used to take me there, and they would get annoyed with me because I would spend probably like 30 minutes at most just at one exhibit, trying to scan everything, trying to look at everything, and nothing has changed. I love the amount of things that you can learn with the Smithsonian museums. I love the history that it has there. So that by far is my favorite spot in DC. If I had to pick a second favorite spot in DC, it would probably be, I think it'd be Van Ness because of how different. It seems more of like a safe spot, more of a kind of like a community oriented spot. Um, you know, so I think those are my two favorite DC.
Nice. Would you ever run for office one day?
I always thought saw myself running for office, and nothing has
Mhm.
changed. I would love to run for office, and the reason why I know that this field is for me is because even if I'm one of, like you had mentioned, the background folks, I would be fulfilled. I would
Mhm.
feel as if my purpose would be accomplished because my talents, like I said, I think are best put to use in this arena. You know, despite the in addition to the policy goals that I would love to achieve, I love the game of it all. I love the debating about positions, and I love getting to pick people's brains as to where their policies lie, and I love the whole back and forth of politics. I love election nights. It's like
Mm.
Olympics every 4 years. So
Well, whenever you decide to run, if you need a staffer in any capacity, I am available. I would love to help your campaign and help you to win one day, whatever
or
you run in.
when you take Senator Schumer's seat, you know where to go for a
I
campaign.
don't know about that. I feel like a lot of people want me to run one day. Like you said, I would be happy being a chief of staff or like a policy director. I would be happy with those as well.
Definitely.
Never say never because you don't
Never.
know what could happen. But
No, you don't. I really, even in going back 5 years, I wouldn't have imagined five years from now, the next 5 years happening the way it did. So
mhm,
it's unpredictable.
exactly. So the door is open. That's what I say to that. And then this is an added question just because
Mhm.
the listeners don't know, but we're on Zoom right now, and I can see your lovely bookshelf behind you. So I would love to know what is something besides law,
Mhm.
like either something you're currently reading or like you plan to read.
Okay, so that's a great question. I actually got 5 books for my birthday, all of which are political books. But the book that I'm reading right now is Fear by Bob Woodward, and this
Mm.
is to his book Rage.
Hmm.
What this book does, it really peels back the curtain as to what was going on during the Trump days. Uh, Starting with the pandemic, it starts with Robert O'Brien, the National Security Advisor, telling Trump that the COVID-19 pandemic is going to be the most significant, national defense issue he'll ever have to face in his presidency, which was prophetic because we're still dealing with the effects now. And it cost him the election. So I think this book, what it does is it lets you know the key players. It lets you know how each administration has a different flavor to it, and how they make their decisions and everything, and who has leverage and who has power, and and so what this book does is it shows you the dynamics at play at the Trump White House, despite the comedic theater of it all and everything like that. Who was actually in the president's ear the most, and
Mm.
why, and what kind of relationships were the most productive and the most disastrous. And so it's a really interesting book. So I would say that definitely is what I'm reading and hoping to finish soon. But also a higher calling, a higher loyalty. I'm sorry, by James Comey,
Mm.
a book that I've received that I hope to get to, because I've watched the HBCO series, the two-part series. It was really insightful, a thriller for anyone who's interested, and so that was based on the book. So I'm hoping that the book actually exceeds what the two-part series bought.
Nice, nice. And then my last question, because again, you're a law student,
Mhm.
and so you're juggling a lot of different things. So what do you do for self-care? And like just in general, what do you like to do for fun?
So right now, I have been burning the candle on both ends a lot, have frequent headaches. But for self care, I think what I do for my downtime, there's a series, and you might be familiar with it, 24.
Mm-hmm.
This series keeps you on edge. And it really it more than just takes your mind out of law school. It takes your mind to domestic terrorism and international terrorism, and how to thwart those plans and everything like that. So it constantly keeps you on edge, and the writing is so ingenious. It You'll never know. Nobody can ever be an expert as to what to predict. There's certain shows where you can get the feeling and you're like, okay, I know this character's going to do this next, and I know this one's going to say that. But this show is really unprecedented, I think, because of how unpredictable, how as many twists and turns are in these seasons, and it's something that I've really enjoyed, and it's taken my mind away from work a little bit. And so that's, I guess, if I were to describe it as self care, that's what it was.
Nice. I like that is a throwback if I've heard one because I have not heard that show's name in a minute. um, but that's nice. I asked that because I like want to like you do all these great things, but like what does Michael do on his downtime? What does he do to relax when he's not in the law books or not preparing for
I want to add,
exams?
I do write poetry, and I
Mm.
downloaded this app. What's it called? Voicey, and I actually put some of the poetry that I write behind some music, and
Mm.
sometimes it'll mesh really perfectly. And even though it's just a small snippet, as to how much you can create, it really serves as a really good repository for creativity, I think.
Wow. Well, you should definitely send me the link to that so our audience can check out your poetry. Um, Before we go, where can people find you? Also, where can they check out the political mic?
Definitely. So the political mic is available on YouTube and Facebook Live. I'm in the works of getting it on Spotify, on Apple, TuneIn, and where other podcasts are streamed. But as of right now, you can tune in on YouTube. Type in the political mic. You should see. As of right now, there are 35 episodes. 36 episode 36 is coming out tomorrow, and this is going to be great. This is going to be the first episode where I'm not going to be a part of the discussion. It's going to be an all-female panel, dynamic folks, and it's going to be aimed at closing Women's History Month. So I would encourage your listeners, if they can, if they have time, to go ahead and tune in. Dabney is going to also be on shortly, I hope soon. Um,
Have me anytime.
so that's where they can find it. Also, search my name, Michael Taylor, on Facebook. You should be able to see it. Um, and I regularly share the videos on the HBCU for students for Biden and Harris page. It's a huge Facebook page with primarily HBCU students who helped with the Biden Harris campaign. If you want to find my videos, you can find it there too.
Mm. So y'all heard, and I'll make sure in the episode notes to put the links to all of that so that people can easily access it. But thank you so much, Michael, for being on the show. You're like I said, you're such an intellectual, insightful person, and I really enjoyed this conversation and getting to know you a little bit better and sort of like the why behind like digging into your brain a little bit and your process through certain things. And I'm sure the listeners are also feeling the same way and gained a lot more information about Capitol Hill and politics in general than they did before listening. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an honor.
Of course. All right. I really hope y'all enjoyed that episode and got a lot out of Michael's story. For this week's Dabney's debrief, one thing that is I think is crucial, and Michael sort of emphasized this as well, is participating in our government. For the US, participation in our government is so crucial, whether that's on a local, state, or federal level. And there are various ways that you can participate that goes beyond voting. So, voting only happens every couple of years. Every 4 years for the presidential election, every 2 year for 2 years for Congress. And if you're thinking about local, um, there's school boards. Also thinking about your state elections, like governors and state reps and state senators. All of those happen every couple of years. And so it's very easy to become apathetic and to not pay attention until it comes time to vote. And if you are someone that doesn't vote, I highly encourage you to vote and to do your research on how you can be an active voter and get registered in your state. So, beyond voting, what can you do to be active in our government? One way that you can be active is keeping up with the news. And you don't have to keep up with the news every day, just every once in a while, keeping up with what's happening in our government. Um, Make sure that your news source is reputable and trustworthy. Obviously, bias exists, but make sure that you're getting information from an array of sources so that you can make wise, well informed decisions. And I will link to an article that has a map of every major news source and where they lie within the political spectrum in terms of bias, if they're more left leaning or right, or if they're more neutral. They don't include local news sources, so I highly encourage you to also pay attention to that, because that will keep you um, informed on what's happening in your town, in your city, in your state. Another way that you can participate is attending hearings, your city council hearings. Obviously, with the pandemic, you can't necessarily physically attend, but a lot of times, a lot of cities are doing virtual hearings. And even before the pandemic, a lot of them recorded their hearings. And so even if you couldn't physically attend, you could always check them out at a later time. So I encourage you to also look at those. Again, Google is your friend. Look up your city and their council. Look who your city council members are. Look up what their agendas are and what the bills that they're passing. Things like that. Another way is to call your reps and senators, whether that's on the state level or federal level, to share your thoughts on what you think they should do. One word of advice: if you're going to do that, please, 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 as someone who's been on the receiving end of these calls, of constituent calls, please be nice. When you call, you are not going to get, for example, Senator Chuck Schumer on the phone. You're just not. You're not going to talk to him. So accept that and be kind. It's usually a staffer or an intern on the other side. And they're getting tons of calls from everyone. There's usually multiple people on the line all day, and they're just trying to do their job. They're trying to help you, and they're trying to pass along your message to your representative. So be kind, be nice. I've had my fair share of really rude and disrespectful people, and it's not fun. It's not fun. So be nice. And then lastly, if there's a cause that you care about, there are tons of organizations that you can be involved with that rally others that are also passionate, and they have conversations with or meetings with these politicians to talk about their own agenda. So obviously, what I've said isn't the full list of ways that you can participate, but it's some easy ways that you can. And so the reflection question I want to leave with you is, in what ways are you currently active in our democracy? And if you're not currently active, what is one thing you can start to do beyond voting to participate? So definitely think about that this week. Think about in ways that you can sort of plug that into your daily life. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to today's episode. For links and resources, check out the episode notes. If you liked what you heard, help your girl out by leaving a 5-star rating and a review. For more content and updates, follow the show's Insta at the Uplift_podcast. And spread the word by telling your friends and sharing on social media. Subscribe to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. For any questions or business inquiries, you can email me at theupliftpodcast1@gmail.com. This was The Uplift with Dabney Brice. See you next time.